Let's talk about sunscreen, because I think there's still a significant portion of the population that views it as cosmetic rather than medical. They see it as something to prevent visible damage, sunburn, tanning, aging, rather than as a tool that's actively protecting cellular function. The evidence shows that sunscreen is doing something much more fundamental than preventing redness. When you apply sunscreen correctly, you're creating a physical and chemical barrier that absorbs, reflects, or scatters UV radiation before it can penetrate into your skin cells. That means the UV photons that would have directly interacted with your DNA, RNA, and proteins instead interact with the sunscreen molecules. The damage gets stopped before it reaches living tissue. Studies that have looked at skin biopsies from people who use sunscreen regularly versus those who don't show striking differences at the molecular level. Regular sunscreen users have significantly fewer thymine dimers, those DNA lesions caused by UV. They have lower levels of inflammatory markers. They have fewer mutations with UV signatures in their skin cell DNA. Even their skin's immune function is better preserved. We're not talking about subtle differences here. We're talking about measurably different cellular environments. Long-term studies have provided even more compelling evidence. A landmark Australian study followed participants for years and found that regular sunscreen use reduced the incidence of invasive melanoma by about 50% and squamous cell carcinoma by about 40%. These aren't small effects. We're talking about cutting your cancer risk nearly in half with a relatively simple intervention. There's also evidence that sunscreen doesn't just prevent new damage, it gives previously damaged cells a better chance to recover. When you reduce the ongoing UV assault on your skin, your cell's repair systems can work more efficiently. They're not constantly overwhelmed with new damage, so they can catch up on fixing old damage. Inflammation can resolve rather than becoming chronic. The cellular environment can shift from stressed and pro-cancer to something more stable and protected. Now, I want to acknowledge the concerns and misconceptions that have circulated about sunscreen because they matter for public health. Some people worry about the chemicals in sunscreen being absorbed into the bloodstream. This is true, some UV filters can be detected systemically, but the concentrations are very low, and importantly, there's no evidence that this causes harm. Compare that to the very clear, very well-documented harm from UV exposure, and the risk-benefit calculation strongly favors sunscreen use. There have also been concerns about sunscreen causing vitamin D deficiency. In practice, this doesn't seem to be a significant problem. Most people don't apply sunscreen thickly enough or reapply frequently enough to completely block vitamin D production. And even if sunscreen use did reduce vitamin D synthesis somewhat, vitamin D can be obtained from diet and supplements, whereas there's no substitute for protecting your DNA from UV-induced mutations. The real issue with sunscreen is not safety or effectiveness, it's user behavior. Most people apply far less than the recommended amount, don't reapply after swimming or sweating, and don't use it on cloudy days or during everyday activities. Sunscreen works beautifully when used correctly, but correct use requires more diligence than most people demonstrate. Here's my positive take. We have a tool that demonstrably reduces cancer risk at the cellular level, that's been tested in millions of people over decades, and that's readily accessible and affordable. The fact that it's not perfect, that it requires proper application, doesn't diminish its value. It's one of the most effective cancer prevention tools we have. Treating it as optional or cosmetic is a missed opportunity for cellular protection that we know works.